The night shift at Metropolitan General was always challenging, but this one would change everything. I was just finishing my rounds when they brought him in, an elderly man, unconscious, wearing tattered clothes and carrying no ID. Another homeless case, Dr. Richards sighed, barely glancing at the patient. Put him in the hallway until we clear a non-priority bed. But something about the man's face seemed familiar. Despite his ragged appearance, his hands showed signs of recent professional care. And the way he was clutching a worn leather notebook. I'll take him to room 712. I decided. It was technically reserved for VIP patients, but it had been empty for weeks. Are you insane, Sarah? Amy, the charge nurse whispered. If Dr. Harrison finds out you put a homeless man in a VIP suite. Dr. Victoria Harrison wasn't just any hospital administrator. She was the CEO who turned Metropolitan General from a caring community hospital into a profit-focused corporation. Under her leadership, non-priority patients were often left waiting for hours. Everyone deserves proper care, I replied, remembering my own father's last days in a hospital hallway. Help me move him. As we transferred the mystery patient, his notebook fell open. I caught a glimpse of complex medical diagrams before quickly closing it. Something wasn't adding up. I spent my entire shift monitoring him, neglecting the paperwork Dr. Harrison always insisted was more important than excessive patient attention. His vitals were stable but concerning. Every instinct told me this man needed careful observation. At 6 a.m., Dr. Harrison's clicking heels announced her early morning inspection. She stopped dead when she saw our hallway empty of waiting patients. Where are the overflow cases? She demanded. Room 712, I answered honestly. I assessed the situation and... You put someone in a VIP suite without authorization. Her perfectly painted lips curled in disgust. Who? John Doe case, approximately 70 years old, brought in at 2 a.m. with a homeless man. She cut me off. In my VIP wing. She stormed into room 712, taking in the scene with growing fury. Are you deliberately trying to destroy this hospital's reputation? He needs proper care. I stood my ground. His symptoms indicate. Your job isn't to think, she snapped. It's to follow protocols, and protocol says non-paying patients wait in the hallway. That's not healthcare, I protested. It's not what Metropolitan General used to stand for. Used to? She laughed coldly. You mean before I turned this failing hospital into a profitable enterprise? Clear this room immediately and consider yourself terminated. You can't fire her for providing care, Amy spoke up. I can fire her for misuse of hospital resources, Dr. Harrison smiled. Security, please escort Nurse Chen out of the building. And move this person to the hallway where he belongs. As security approached, the patient's heart monitor began beeping erratically. I rushed to his side, professional instincts taking over. Step away from him, Dr. Harrison ordered. You're no longer employed here. That's when the patient's eyes opened. He looked straight at me, then at Dr. Harrison, and spoke in a clear, educated voice. Actually, she works for me. We all do. Dr. Harrison froze. What? Thomas Chen, he said calmly, despite the monitor's warnings. Majority shareholder of Metropolitan General Hospital. And I believe we need to discuss how you've been running my father's legacy. The security guards stepped back. Dr. Harrison's face went from angry red to ghostly white. Because everyone in healthcare knew the Chen name. The family that had built Metropolitan General from a small clinic into a major hospital before mysteriously disappearing 15 years ago. But as Dr. Harrison stammered excuses, I noticed something alarming on the monitors. Mr. Chen's stable condition was rapidly deteriorating, and his next words confirmed my worst fears. Sarah, I'm afraid I've been poisoned. Code blue. I shouted, already moving to action as Mr. Chen's vitals plummeted. Amy, get me a toxicology kit. Dr. Harrison stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking. Stop, you're not employed here anymore. You can't. Either help or get out of my way, I snapped, starting emergency protocols. Years of ER experience took over as I worked to stabilize him. Mr. Chen grabbed my hand weakly. The notebook, he whispered. Don't let her. But Dr. Harrison had already snatched the worn leather journal from the bedside table. As she flipped through it, her face shifted from confusion to shock to something darker. Security, she said quietly, clear the room. No one comes in or out without my authorization. That man needs immediate care. I protested. Oh, we'll get care, she smiled coldly. The best care money can buy. Just not from you. She held up the notebook. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out, Thomas? That your little undercover investigation wouldn't be noticed? The security guards looked uncertain. Dr. Harrison, he needs medical attention. What he needs, she cut them off, is to understand that some things should stay buried. Like what really happened to his father 15 years ago. Mr. Chen's monitors were screaming now. But as I moved to help him, one of the security guards grabbed my arm. Not the hospital's regular security. This man wore an earpiece I'd never seen before. The poison, Mr. Chen managed between gasps. It wasn't just me. Check the general supply. Horror dawned as I understood. I've been noticing increased complications in routine cases over the past month. Small things, patients taking longer to recover, unexpected reactions to standard medications. You've been tampering with the hospital's medical supplies, I accused Dr. Harrison. That's why you changed suppliers last month. That's why you've been restricting access to the pharmacy records. She laughed, a harsh, unfamiliar sound. Tampering? I've been correcting a mistake. This hospital was supposed to be mine. Richard Chen promised it to me before his mysterious accident, but he left everything to his idealistic son instead. So you've been slowly poisoning patients, I said in disbelief, making the hospital look incompetent under the Chen family's ownership. Forcing them to sell, she finished smugly. The board meets tomorrow to discuss the hospital's future. Once they see the mortality rates, the malpractice risks. She patted Mr. Chen's hand almost gently. Don't worry, your death will be attributed to your homeless lifestyle. Such a tragic end to the Chen legacy. But she'd forgotten something crucial about emergency rooms. We never work alone. And while she'd been focused on me, Amy had slipped out during the chaos. The room's speaker crackled to life. Code black in progress. All personnel implement Protocol 17 immediately. Dr. Harrison's face went pale. No, that's impossible. That protocol was deleted years ago, was it? Mr. Chen's voice was weak but clear. Or did you just think it was? The light suddenly shifted to ultraviolet, revealing something shocking on Dr. Harrison's hands and clothes. Traces of the very poison she'd been using glowing in unmistakable blue under the specialized light. But as security moved to detain her, she pulled out a syringe. Nobody move. One step and he gets the full dose. What she didn't notice was the slight smile on Mr. Chen's face, or the fact that his deteriorating vital signs had suddenly stabilized. Interesting syringe, Dr. Harrison, Mr. Chen said, suddenly sounding much stronger. But I believe you'll find it's filled with saline. Dr. Harrison stared at the syringe in her hand, then at the monitors showing Mr. Chen's stabilizing vitals. Impossible, she whispered. The poison was neutralized about 20 minutes ago, I explained, finally understanding. When I accidentally knocked over your coffee during the code blue. The antidote was in my ID badge dispenser, standard issue for all employees under Protocol 17. A protocol you thought you'd erased, Mr. Chen added, sitting up straighter. Just like you thought you'd erase all traces of what happened to my father 15 years ago. The ultraviolet lights continued to reveal damning evidence, glowing traces of various compounds on Dr. Harrison's clothes, hands, and even her designer handbag. You don't understand, she said desperately. Your father was going to ruin everything. His healthcare for all policy was bankrupting us. When he refused to change course. You arranged his accident, Mr. Chen finished. But you made one crucial mistake. Amy returned with a team of FBI agents, led by a familiar face. Dr. Richards, the dismissive doctor from earlier. Agent Sarah Chen, my supposed colleague, introduced herself. FBI Healthcare Fraud Division. We've been building this case for months. Dr. Harrison's composure finally shattered completely. The whole thing was a setup. Not exactly, Mr. Chen explained. We knew someone was poisoning patients, but we didn't know who. My homeless admission was a calculated risk to draw out the perpetrator. But Sarah, Dr. Harrison looked at me with dawning horror. She's just a nurse. Is she? Mr. Chen smiled. Or is she the person who first noticed the pattern of complications? The one who started documenting everything in that notebook you're holding? which, by the way, is transmitting everything you've said to the FBI. The notebook in her hand suddenly beeped, its hidden camera capturing her expression as she realized the full scope of the trap. But as agents moved to arrest her, Dr. Harrison pressed a button on her phone. If I'm going down, I'm taking this whole hospital with me. Alarm systems began blaring throughout the building. On the security monitors, we could see emergency doors sealing themselves, trapping patients and staff inside. Dead man's switch, she laughed hysterically. In 15 minutes, every compromised medication in this hospital will be automatically administered through the electronic dispensing system. Hundreds of patients. Unless what? Agent Chen demanded. Unless the Chen family signs over the hospital, completely and permanently. Mr. Chen looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. Because what Dr. Harrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had one more secret of my own. Actually, I said quietly, removing my nurse's ID badge, the Chen family has already signed over the hospital. I pulled out another badge from my scrubs pocket, one that made Dr. Harrison's eyes go wide. Sarah Chen, MD, PhD, Chief Executive Officer, Metropolitan Health Systems. No, Dr. Harrison breathed. That's impossible. Not impossible, Mr. Chen smiled. Inevitable. You see, Sarah isn't just any nurse. She's my daughter, and more importantly, she's Richard Chen's granddaughter. The pieces clicked into place for everyone watching. Why I worked every position in the hospital, from janitor to nurse. Why I cared so much about every patient. I wasn't just learning the jobs, I was learning my grandfather's legacy from the ground up. The paperwork was finalized last week, I explained, accessing the hospital's main system with my true credentials. Which means your dead man's switch? It's trying to access a system you no longer control. On the monitors, we could see the emergency protocols reversing, doors unlocking, medication systems returning to normal operation. But your father, Dr. Harrison sputtered. Richard Chen died before he could. Before he could what? I asked. Change his will? Name you a successor? I pulled up documents on the nearest screen. Actually, he did something far more important that night. He recorded everything. Security footage began playing, 15 years old but crystal clear. It showed a younger Dr. Harrison in my grandfather's office, demanding control of the hospital. Healthcare is a business, she screamed in the footage, not your personal charity. Healthcare is a right, my grandfather's voice replied calmly. And this hospital will never prioritize profits over patients, not while a Chen is alive to prevent it. The footage showed what happened next. Dr. Harrison's rage, the poison she slipped into his drink, not realizing he'd already swapped the glasses. He survived, Mr. Chen explained. Barely, but he knew the hospital wasn't safe while she remained in power. So he went into hiding, protecting his legacy until the right moment. And that moment, I stepped closer to Dr. Harrison. Was finding someone who could rebuild Metropolitan General from the inside out. Someone who understood every job, every patient, every detail of what makes a hospital work. The FBI agents moved in to arrest her, but Dr. Harrison had one final card to play. She pulled out another phone, a dead man's switch for something far worse. One press, she threatened, and every media outlet gets proof of patient neglect under Chen family management. Your reputation will be destroyed. I almost laughed. You mean the carefully documented cases of neglect you orchestrated? The ones we've been tracking and correcting for months? Check your phone's signal. She pressed the button repeatedly, growing more frantic. Nothing happened. Hospital rooms have excellent signal blocking, I explained, especially when you know which frequencies to target. As they led her away in handcuffs, the morning shift arrived to find their hospital transformed. The homeless patient was now revealed as the long-lost Thomas Chen. The fired nurse was their new CEO. And most importantly, the hospital was returning to its original mission. 1 year later, Metropolitan General leads the country in patient care quality. I still work nursing shifts regularly, now with my real name badge. My father handles the business side while I focus on medicine, continuing my grandfather's legacy of putting patients first. Dr. Harrison serves her sentence in a minimum security prison, where she's required to provide basic medical care to fellow inmates. Sometimes the best karma is being forced to give the very thing you tried to deny others. The notebook that captured everything. It sits in my office, A reminder that the most important medical tool isn't technology or money. It's the willingness to care for every patient, regardless of their appearance or ability to pay. After all, you never know when the homeless person in your emergency room might turn out to be someone extraordinary, or more importantly, when an ordinary person might need extraordinary care.